Good evening, trustees. Tonight I'm going to present a budget update. This is the same slightly edited community budget update that we've been using with our PTAs and boosters as we're going around on our roadshow to each and every site's family support teams, we can call them, to talk about our budget. I've modified it slightly to take out the learning things, as the board already understands what an LCFF versus a basic aid district is. But this does have what our current budget constraints are, comparisons for other districts, our parcel tax, which is our local funding source. And I wanted to start by kind of talking about what the impetus for all this was. And we received, as part of our budget approval, our budget goes to the County of Marin, the Marin County Office of Education. They do their fiscal analysis, and then they come back with a letter. And that is a totally normal process. They do that every single time. What was unique about this one was that there was a concern about our ending fund balance, and the ending fund balance, both at the end of this year and in future years, and how it wasn't hitting what the board's required reserve is. And we needed to come up with a budget stabilization plan. And this is one of those steps, is communication, transparency is part of that plan. We have to start with actually identifying what the problem is. And this problem is twofold. We have a $11 million deficit this year that was not planned to be $11 million. We're going to go into the revenue side, but what we're not really talking about on this is the expenses side. And when I get to the end of piece, I want to talk a little bit about those expenses that have come out of nowhere and were unplanned as well. So Novato Unified School District has about a $130 million budget. Usually we talk about the expenses, so we'll say it's a $130 million budget. But we get around $20 million in. So there's problem number one. How does the money come into the district? We have about 85% coming in as state. So that is the LCFF funds and the state programming, ELOP being one of those that we just heard a presentation about. Federal is 6.3%, and then local is around 12%. Local is our parcel tax, the largest single portion of that at $4 million. And then we also have local grants. We also had a presentation on that, the presentation of the check from Rotary goes into those local funds. How the money leaves the district, in other words, how do we spend that money? 80% or more is spent on staffing, and that's district staffing. So the teachers, principals, all employees at the school and the district office. This is specifically about Fund 01. So just to clarify, the only group that's left out of this is food services, and that's because food services is in Fund 13. They are insular. So this is everyone else in our entire district other than food services. And that's true of everything on here. So when we talk about books and supplies, not talking about food services. Okay, they are their own insular fund. This is all Fund 01, our general fund. Also doesn't include bond, things like that. So books, supplies, utilities, maintenance, operations, insurance, the lights, camera action, everything that makes this district run is about 20% of our budget. And then the 2.5% of other is going to be those one-time asset purchases that we may have. Examples of that can be a maintenance and operations van that needs to be replaced, a bus and transportation that needs to be replaced. We're not buying a new one every year, and it's on an ongoing cost, but most likely in a district our size, we're going to have about 2.5% of asset purchases each year. So the LCFF, as we know, is ADA times a dollar amount. That dollar amount is set by the state budget each and every year. And normally, other than in 2008, every year has had a COLA, a cost of living adjustment. That cost of living adjustment raises that dollar amount each year. So we expect it to go up. In fiscal year 23-24, that was when I took this position. The column on the left, labeled fiscal year 23-24, were the projected and current COLAs. We came in with a 6.56, the historical high, until the 8.22 of the year later. And we saw that it was going to be 3.94, 3.29, so on and so forth as time went on. Fast forward 2 years. We are now in 25-26. The 6.56 was already implemented. The 8.22 was implemented as we came in. What happened? Well, now it's 1.07 in 24-25, and then 2.3 instead of 3.29, and 3.02 instead of 3.19. And those don't look like really big variances, but the problem is that we have a $120 million budget. These are percentages off of $90 million, which is the LCFF portion of that budget. And out of $90 million, 1% is $900,000. Right? So it's basically almost $1 million for every 1%. So what did that mean? Well, in 23-24, we made decisions on the future based on these numbers. Who gives us these numbers? The Department of Revenue, a state organization that advises the governor. They tell us, hey, these are what we believe the COLA is going to be. So we put those into our budget, and then we make decisions, and we operate, and then it changes, and then it changes again. So the question might be, well, why did you go with the numbers if they always go down? They don't. That 6.56 was originally supposed to be 2%, and that 8.22 was supposed to be 3%, and they became numbers that high. So going off of just that short time, we probably would have increased the numbers. We didn't. We held them with what the state said, and then they were less. Now, how does that work? They basically go back and they retro. Now, nobody took the money from us. That's not what I'm saying. These are projections. But they became less than what were projected. And that's because these numbers are a federal number. They're based off of federal pieces. But the state is allowed to budget for the current year and the previous 2 years. They go back and they adjust based on what the reality was and where it should have been. And 8.22 was deemed too high. That's not what the actual number was. The actual number was less. So they take it from future years. And so now it becomes 1.07 and 2.3. And on the chart on the right-hand side, the red is where we were projected to be 2 years ago. The purple is where we are now. And that's if everything holds stable. And those numbers those lines don't look too far apart. Those lines are $3.75 million apart. $3.75 million per year, every year, ongoing into the future is what this district no longer has to work with that we were working with 2 years ago. So a lot of decisions that were made over the last 3 years were basically torn up because of this. But the other side of that equation, right? We just said that LCFF is ADA multiplied by dollar amount. We just discussed dollar amount. So what is ADA? ADA is the average daily attendance. That is enrollment minus when kids are absent from school. So ADA is specifically, we like to refer to it as butts in seats. That's the kids coming to school, showing up every day. We had a projected enrollment of 7,300, but after some changes with the federal administration and the way that they view immigration, we saw a big drop through the second half. Basically right after January, we started seeing a drop. And then we had still students confirmed to come to school this year, and about 150 of them didn't show up. Now, that is not a drop of 150 from last year. It's a drop of about 80 from last year. We're talking again about projected. We were projecting growth because we were seeing growth. Our TK class was getting bigger. Kids were confirming, their families were confirming that they were coming back, and then they didn't. And so we know that a portion of that is due to immigration practices, but that's not the whole story. We're still investigating where that actually lands, but it can't not be said that that did have an effect on us and have an effect on our funding of families leaving the area. So what did that do to us? Well, we started at $92.38 million for this year in LCFF funding, and $92.38 million already took into account that loss of $3.7 million. That was already there because the dollar amount was set in June. But the student amount wasn't until July 1st, after the budget was passed. At that loss of 150 students, we're now at $90,593,000. That's a loss of $1.788 million. So this year we're operating at $5.4 million less than we thought we were going to be operating at 2 years ago. So our budget is $5.4 million worse than what we were projecting. That also has some extra pieces. Right now we're just talking about LCFF, but the LCAP supplemental, the unrestricted and restricted lottery dollars, the mandated block grant, and ELOP are all based on ADA. So those are other funds that we're not even talking about here that are being reduced because of ADA being lower. We've talked about the state changes. I do want to shout out the state and say that they seem like they are trying to put more money into schools, but that is a large portion of that is special education dollars, which get a COLA every year. A large portion of that is ELOP. It's up to $2.5 million, almost $3 million, $4 million, my goodness. So those are restricted programs. I can't use them on operations. I can only use those on the things that they're designed for. So while it's fantastic that we went from $8.3 million before COVID to $15 million now, it doesn't solve the budget problem because it's not allowed to be used throughout the system. It has to be used on specific programs. The federal dollars, they've grown as well, but instead of doubling, they've gone up about 25 to 30%. Also great, but extremely restricted dollars. Where the state is mostly restricted, these are extremely restricted dollars, and that's before we know what the federal budget's going to even look like. This was somewhere where I wanted to talk about expenses, two things, the state and the federal level. At the state level, AB 218 was a removal of the statute of limitations for sexual assault and molestation cases. What that has done is that while our district has not had to face the legal ramifications of that, our insurance has. And so we got hit with a $550,000 ongoing bill to participate in the insurance that covers these types of cases. That was unprojected. That was unknown to us until the bills started showing up. And the option is we could not pay this bill, but then if we were to ever get one, and remember, this is going back 40 years, if we were to get one, some of these molestation cases are being settled for 60, 70, 80 million dollars that we would have to pay out of pocket. On the federal level, we had and it's still being worked out, but Marin County Office of Education was getting a grant for mental health dollars. That got pulled. That was $400,000 added to our budget because this got pulled after the layoff notice date of last year. So we had to carry those positions, not saying that we didn't want to, but we no longer had the funding for these positions going into this year. Now we're still working with Marin County Office of Ed, and they're taking legal action, from what I understand, to try to get this money back because it was guaranteed and then it was pulled back. But until then, we're operating at a loss of $400,000. That's $1 million added to our budget this year that was not planned for. And that's on the expense side. So let's look at the funding of other districts, because we get the question a lot, well, if I look at TAM, if I look at San Rafael, if I look at blank, they get to do this. Why can't Novato? Why can't Novato do that? Why can't we hit this target marker that's important to me as a staff member, as a parent, whatnot? And this list is the amount of funding per student. This only includes Fund 01. This is only general fund, but includes everything. LCFF dollars or basic aid dollars, your state and federal funding, and your local parcel tax dollars, and all grants that you might receive. And then this is divided out by your ADA. How many students do you have, right? Now, yes, all the way on the right-hand side are very tiny districts and probably aren't good for conversation because they skew the numbers when we're talking about Ballina Stinson at $63,000 per student. All of this information is available on eddata.org, so you can also go verify it if you want to. Eddata.org, that's where I pulled this all from. But as we get further out to the left, we can look at like a district like San Rafael. San Rafael is a district that's very comparable to us. They're very close to us. They have a very similar population. They have about 200 less students than us. They are 2 districts in one, so I've combined them on here, but they are an elementary and a high school district. They serve TK through 12th grade, and they receive $22,000 per student. Novato receives $17,600 per student. When you multiply that out by 7,000 students, we're talking about a difference of around $22 million per year. So why can't we do what some other districts are doing? Because we don't get $22 extra million a year. That's one of the main reasons why. And I always try when I display this, I do not want to vilify any of these districts. That is not the point. Most of these districts are basic aid districts. That is the system that the LCFF basically set up. So when LCFF came about in 2013, that included this idea of basic aid districts. These are just in residential areas that have a population that pays a higher level of property tax versus their amount of students. They have fundraising arms that make more money. I'm not vilifying any of these districts or saying anyone is doing anything wrong. It's just the reality of the funding model that we live in. And unless we can change anything at the state level, which remember that 90% of the districts in California are just like us, that are way down there at that $17,000 level. Of the 10% of districts that are basic aid, 90% of those are in the North Bay area, Marin, Napa, and Sonoma. But there's another side of this, because there is something that we can deal with, and that's the local portion of this. So this is just talking about total, right? But let's talk about the local, and that's our parcel tax. So on this chart here, we're talking about a parcel tax. And Novato Unified School District has a parcel tax of $251. The only one lower than us is Shoreline. But if we go back to here, Shoreline is funded at $44,000 per student, so we won't bring them into the conversation right now. So starting at Novato, we are the lowest funded. We also have the lowest parcel tax for members of the public to pay. That's what this chart is showing you. Because if you live in the Miller Creek Elementary School District, Miller Creek has a $578 parcel tax. But the residents have to pay the Miller Creek and the San Rafael High School District, which means that those residents pay $839. If you live in Kentfield, good for you, but you're also paying $2,386 in parcel tax every single year. That is a huge difference when our district is paying $251, all of the residents. So if we even doubled it, we would still be the lowest on this list. We would still be the lowest on this list if we doubled our parcel tax, which is showing a gigantic gap that we need to fill. NUSD receives about $4 million, a little over $4 million in parcel tax. It's been the same number, $251, since 2009. What else has been the same price since 2009? Nothing. So what does that mean? The programs that the parcel tax was designed to cover, the parcel tax now covers about 17% of those programs. So let that part sink in, right? We care about these programs. We want to fund these programs. The residents of Novato say, I want to fund these and I'm going to pay for them. And it only covers 17% of that. So I think that there's a lot left on the table here for us to do. That's the end of the presentation.